Welcome into another episode of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. This is episode 78, and I'm your host, Ronnie Moore. With me, as always, my co-host, Kyle Jessie, digital content editor at Bassmaster.com, making everything work not only in Birmingham, but also on the water at Elite Series events. Kyle, we just got done with one of the best events that we have had in a long time, but it's seemingly our best event every year because of the gym that is Lake Fork.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was talked about a lot this week between, the people there at the tournament. What's crazy about Lake Fork is the fact that you look at pretty much any other heavyweight, slugfest type lake, it goes through ups and downs. I mean, that's not unusual to see, but Lake Fork just continues to stay constant, continues to be, one of the heaviest hitting lakes in the country. And it proved it again this time.
Yeah, and if you're just joining us, please feel free on the Apple Podcast platform, anywhere else, just drop a review. Let us know how we're doing. 5 stars always. This is kind of a lot of those reviews and a lot of those things have been from back when we started in 2020. We would love to jump back in and get some feedback on the way our shows do. So like and subscribe, check it out as well. Kyle, you mentioned it, Lake Fork, from the people who are on site to the people who are watching from afar. It is such a treat. It is such a special body of water. And the one thing that viewers who may not know, and I want to get it out of the way already, we do it a little different for the Elite Series when we go there. And it's not for any other reason, but because legally we have to do it this way. And that is the catch-away release format at Lake Fork. And the way we do it, because I will say, and I'm going to go and defend the way that B.A.S.S does our tournament formats, because the five fish limit, putting them in your live well, bringing them to weigh in, that does not inhibit the growth of fish on the lake. Gene Gilliland, our conservation director, if we ever had that opportunity to mess up a lake, he would stop it from ever happening. He's on top of that aspect of it. We do try to pivot and adjust or prepare our anglers the best way possible. If it's going to be really hot, really cold. But on this given lake, Lake Fork, we do the catch-away release because of the massive slot limit. There are a few lakes in the country that have quite a big slot limit, Lake Fork being one of those, and it's 16 to 24 inches. Those can't go into your live well on tournaments. So that makes tournaments at Lake Fork very difficult. You're either going to have a catch-away release format, or you're going to have 37 pounds and second place is 12 because they caught a bunch of fish 14 to 16 inches, which is the underside of that slot limit. So we have to do that to be able to have a 5 fish limit. It would be very hard to have. You see how it is. We had 4 overs brought in on day 1, 2 on day 2, 1 on day 3, and 0 on day 4. I mean, I feel bad for Chad Pipkins for one. He had multiple 30-pound bags in 2019. He's caught 8 to 9 pounders there, and he's never brought in a fish because all of his 8-pounders have been under 24 inches. From this week with the postbone, we saw 6 10s almost make 24, and we saw 8 3s hit 22. Like it's crazy. But that is the reason why you see judges in the boat, and it stems from the Texas Parks and Wildlife and the whole Toyota Texas Bass Classic events that we used to have, which was a combination of all the fishing leagues coming together for this one celebration event. And that is the way they did it. Said, how do we enhance and showcase the best lakes in Texas that have these restrictions? And that was the format they instilled. So we see it a little different this year. And I know for the crew on site, it's a little bit different as well, but it's the reason we get to fish Lake Fork.
Yeah. And, ultimately you can't argue with the fact that's part of what makes that lake so great is, there's also no debating that that's got to be the most fished lake per size of any lake in the country. But the fact that more often than not, it's just, recreational fishing, catch and release. There's not a whole lot of keeping fish as far as, to eat or anything like that. So, I mean, ultimately those fish have the opportunity to grow and get to the size that we see those fish. And, obviously you can tell just looking at them with the forage and everything else that's in Lake Fork, those fish are just built different. I mean, you rarely see a real skinny fish, an unhealthy looking fish. Like I said, the best way to put it is they really are built different. And, that's a big part of it. I was actually talking to my boat driver who fishes there a lot, Cade Crawford, and he was mentioning that there are every once in a while tournaments that are catch and, not catch and release, excuse me. But it's weird because you're mostly catching unders. The weights would look entirely different than what you would think. It's like catching 12 pounds would be like fantastic, because
did
catching
you guys
a limit
hear?
of unders.
Yeah, did you hear 9 pounds won Lake Fork the other day? And
yeah, exactly.
There was 7 9-pounders caught that weren't able to be weighed in.
Yeah, exactly. Was it a one fish limit? What happened?
Exactly.
But
and I'll also say that, you know, for the folks who may tune in and watch and be like, well, this is why Lake Fork is so good, we need to do catch, weight, release everywhere. I will fight against that and say the reason Lake Fork is so good is because of TPWD, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, stocking millions upon millions of fingerlings, doing all the different DNA testing they do with those share lunkers and that whole share lunker program. It's not just Lake Fork, it's a lot of the Texas lakes that are just putting out big fish. So I wanted to clear that up for anybody who's confused on the formats. I saw those comments. Once a year we do it and everybody's like, wait, what are they doing? And so it also makes weigh-ins a little bit different than normal. So that is Lake Fork in a nutshell. But man, what a special place that you can break 100 pounds every single time we go there. 4 times we've been there. Once in 2019 was late April, early May. Second time was in the fall in 2020. Last year it was late April, like it was all in April. And then this year it was mid to late May. And we get to see 100 pounds each time. And this time it wasn't the highest weight we've seen there, because we've seen 114 pounds. It was just under that mark, but we saw 4 century clubs and 2 other anglers so close. My 6th century belt prediction on the live well with Tommy almost came true, and I was begging for Mark Frazier, Josh Strassner to get it done, or Brian New.
I was too. I was on the water with Josh Strassner, and you know, he had a slow morning and he started picking up momentum, and it was like, well, this is going to happen. It's going to be really, really close. 1 big cull or 2, you know, fairly decent culls away from getting to 100. And, you know, Championship Sunday was weird. You can attest to this more than I can, because I didn't get to see it on live, but, you know, watched on the water. Is every single day anglers were getting out to really, really hot starts. It wasn't always the same people, but there was always somebody jumping out there with nearly 30 pounds within the first, you know, 2 hours, you know, hour and a half even. And that last day, everybody that was catching him so consistently, with Livesay, Polnick, Swindle, LaHue, well, LaHue had caught him, you know, pretty decent in the morning, but everybody was struggling early on. You know, I don't know if that was a result of the cold weather, the change in weather. But you know, to see the progression of that day was really cool. And that was, I think, what made the final day so special. Is it didn't come easy. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. We'll be able to talk to our eventual champion, Lee Livesay, about that. But yeah, basically 4th through 10th, the ones who are so far back, it's only a 2.5-man race. Gerald Swindle barely has a chance, and that's if the other 2 slip up. The other guys don't have a shot. They're just fishing for Century Club hopes. They were the first ones to get 20 pounds, and the top 3 were the last ones, and they had pushed it. I mean, it was like the top 6 were within like 5 pounds. I was like, you catch a 9-pounder.
No doubt.
Anybody's in the game. And so let's bring in our guest, though, and talk to him. I want to get his thoughts on it, because he has done something that is very, very difficult to do. Not only is it hard to win on your home lake, but it's hard to win back-to-back years on your home lake. And he kind of put his exclamation point on it at the end of Bassmaster Live, but he really put the exclamation point on it, you know, the last hour when the show was already done, weigh-in was about to get started. And he just kind of said, you know what, this is my lake, and I'm going to go ahead and knock it out of the park. So welcome into the show, Bassmaster Elite Series champion, the hottest angler in the sport. And I'm not just talking about looks, Lee, but performance on the water. Lee Livesay, our Elite Series champion from Lake Fork. How are you, man?
Man, I'm looking pretty rough right now. I can tell you that, with that week and sunburnt, wind burnt, baby crying all night, and being on these all day. I look pretty rough. I'm not gonna lie. So I know I'm not in no beauty contest today, but I'm good, and we're all good over here at the Livesay house for sure.
Well, all I know, Kyle, I don't know if it's, you know, sometimes girls may look, you know, in high school, they may look more attractive because of their other traits, but like with Lee, he might look rough right now, but knowing that he still smells like 113 pounds and that he also has 100K in his pocket makes him look so much more attractive. I don't know if that's the deal, but Lee, let's talk about that. Let's get off. We're going to get on Lake Fork the whole rest of the podcast as well, but talk about which is one of my least favorite questions to say talk about. So I'll actually ask you a question, but one of the hottest anglers in the sport, it's been 580 days since you won Lake Chickamauga. And in that time in 2020, You won Chickamauga, you won Lake Fork last year, you won an Open at Ross Barnett last month, and you won Lake Fork this year. So 3 Elite Series victories and an Open in 580 days. Just that alone is $350,000. So 580 days and 4 Bassmaster wins. Is this what Lee Livesay had planned all along?
Of course, surprised we didn't win another one.
And to do it, you did it on a couple different places. Fork obviously being your home place, but Ross Barnett and Chickamauga, the way they fished, it's got to be a little bit different than maybe your style of fishing, or places that they would not have circled your name. Fans wouldn't have circled your name and said, this guy is going to be a favorite there.
Right. And you know how it is. I'm really glad that I won Chickamauga before the first fork, and that Open before the first fork, where everybody would just be saying, oh, he's only winning because he's on his home lake, is all that we would be hearing. So that was the best thing that could ever happen on right before both of the fork victories, was getting a different victory somewhere that I had zero experience at both of those lakes. I'd never been to either of them, besides I had fished an Open on Ross Barnett previously. So it felt good to win. It feels just as good to win somewhere else rather than at home.
Lee, we kind of want to dive into your progression, obviously from 2018 fishing the Opens to where you're at now. I know the typical answer, and I've heard you answer this before and just did a second ago. You obviously expect that being a competitor, and you want that to happen, but just talk about that wild ride from starting the Elite Series in 2019 to where you're at today. How's that been for you?
Oh, it's been crazy, obviously, not just the victories, but growing with the guys on the Elite Series and learning the business side of everything. And, it's just a big fraternity as far as us anglers and you guys and our photographers, videographers, our bass staff, but you grow, and relationships have to grow fast in our business, and they do, and, guys like me and Jake, my cameraman, we're like best friends now. We talk every single day, and it's been cool to watch not the fishing side of it, but the business side of it and the friendship side of it. It's pretty cool, and we've kind of, when I got into the Leech, I was green just like everybody else, just like every other rookie, and I didn't have hardly, I think I might have had one fishing related sponsor my first year, and it was a small, Pinch Nasty. It was a small, just mom and pop company. I don't think I had anything fishing besides like maybe free rods or something from Dobbins at that time. So it's cool to see, all my stuff was non-endemic sponsorship to do it, and most of them came from guiding and relationships with friends or clients that had companies that they wanted to sponsor me with. And it's cool to see my progression doing good on the Elites and how I've grown on the fishing side of it, sponsorship wise. And that's pretty cool. And then my fan base, I just talked about this on somebody's this morning, I don't have 150,000 followers like Paul.
It's gonna get there.
Well, or whatever, Scott Martin, who knows what he has, but my growth as a fan base is really organic in my mind. And what I see, we're really personable. I talk to them, they talk to me, I'll invite, like I invited, when I won the other day, I sat in the parking lot with Mercer and drank a beer and stared at the trophy. And there was a bunch of SRA workers over there inside the fence at the SRA office. And when Mercer left, I walked over there and invited them all over to the house that night. And 2 of the guys came over and had a beer with me. And, that's what I like to, that's kind of how I'm liking to build my fan growth, is being really organic, really blue collar, and enjoying the experiences with them and seeing, winning those trophies for them too is what I'm getting at, not just, for me and my family. It's been cool to watch the fans react to me winning, feeling like they're winning too. And it's pretty cool.
Being the people's champ, basically, like you said.
That's what I'm getting towards.
The people's champ. And I'll say, not every Elite Pro has a good nickname. Not every Elite Pro has a nickname. And you've got a pretty good one. The Marshall, that's pretty, I mean, it's a little intimidating, but the people's champ, that's a pretty good one too. And that's one that's kind of self-proclaimed by you. But yeah, For us to have as big a crowds on the final day of a catchway release event, I mean, there are people watching across the world that do those types of tournaments that don't have those crowds for the whole year that show up on the final day with no fish coming in, no overs this year on the final day, but a bunch of big fish were caught. They show up for Lee Livesay to see if the hometown, but it honestly, I don't know how Brian New made it out there. Just popping off like he did. And, Patrick Walters getting close to winning last year. Brandon being in the mix this year with Swindle. I don't know how anybody would have made it out of town if Lee Livesay wasn't holding that trophy at the end of the week.
No, and Swindle was vocal about it. They might stab him on the way out, but it was cool watching that crowd, support me. And we had a great weigh-in and I got to actually, I was in my boat in that tundra on the front side of the stage, so I actually got to watch it too. And I'm usually behind, I can't hear, can't see, so it was a very enjoyable weigh-in watching Gerald and Brandon, how they tied, and obviously Gerald talking how he always talks, and New trying to get himself murdered.
Very confusing.
Cool. It was a good little build up to the victory, so it was actually a very enjoyable crowd to get to watch.
I will say this, Kyle, before I'm going to ask one more thing, but to see the Lees, the Swindles, the Poliniks, the Brian News, I'm trying to think of some other people. Those are really outspoken, vocal people that tend to have a good time. Everybody else in the top 10 is pretty quiet. So it was also cool to see the mixture of the Strassners get exposed to the final day, the Fraziers, LeHue breaking 100 pounds. It was a very cool mix to see that play out. But Lee, I want to get on a serious note. 2016, you fished the Opens. It didn't have the best success. 2017, you finished 15th in points. And then 2018, you finished 16th in points. So my question to you is, it's going to be two parts, but did you plan on fishing the elites? Were you fishing the Opens at that time to make the elites? Because I know you guide a lot, but I also know you've guided a lot in the past. You don't necessarily guide 250 days a year now, but were you kind of segmenting from guiding to wanting to be on the elites in 2016, 17, and then 18?
I didn't know. I got into them at first to fish the Classic, and I almost won my first one that first year, actually. But it was,
was it like fifth? Maybe you got like a fifth or something. Yeah.
It's always just a dream, and not having, coming from any money or anything like that. It's, how could I ever pay for it? That kind of deal. But obviously as I fished them, it was definitely, I was wanting to fish the elites is what it developed into for sure. But until it happens, it's just all a dream. I was never going to be traveling full time fishing on 9 or anything like some of these guys are now, but it just worked out the right way at the right time, and I couldn't be happier.
Because I say that because day 3 of your rookie season, when you had that dock catch at the St. Johns River, we all were kind of exposed to Lee Livesay. That was that catch blew up. It was one of the biggest, if not the best catch of the year. Obviously later on, Brandon Cobb caught an 11-1 and whatnot at Fork that was probably rivaled it, but we got introduced to you really heavily there, first Elite Series event. But I always like to think back and wonder, when I look at the guys who missed the Elite Series now, like 12th, 13th, 14th, I try to think of who would be a budding star, who would be a rising star that didn't make it. It takes me back to 2018 when we had the split at the end of the year and a lot of guys chose to do a different thing for their career path. We extended that invite down the Opens list, and you and Gary Klaus were the last 2 in the Central Opens to be chosen. And at the time, your profile on Bassmaster.com had a white t-shirt, I think with maybe a bass pin. It was a bass badge, like pinned to it. For an event, it was obviously after a weigh-in that, you needed a Bass logo and you didn't have a jersey. So you had that. Looking at Lee Livesay there and wondering we might not know your name if something so not terrible, but traumatic to B.A.S.S as an organization happened and the split happens. We then add a couple extra people to the Opens and invite them in, and boom, one of the last guys invited is now a 4-time Bassmaster champion and one of the most respected and liked guys on the Elite Series. To me, that is amazing. And so I just wanted your thoughts on that. We might never know who Lee Livesay is, and now he's the king of Fork.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to even think about how it all went down, and thank God it did. That's all I can say, honestly. It's just it's been a wild ride for sure from that to where we're at now, and there's always that what if or who if or whatnot. That's always going to be out there. So it happened the right way for me, and I'm very blessed.
So Lee, let's get into the actual tournament, unless Ronnie has any other, alternative questions.
Nope.
So let's talk about the weights to start with. Obviously 113 pounds and 11 ounces. What does that compare to, like what you expected? And then also, what would it have taken to, break the record? Obviously you were pretty outspoken before the tournament that was a major possibility. What would have happened, or what would have had to have happened for that to, take place?
First of all, I just want to call out Ronnie Moore for not picking me on his fantasy team.
Dang, dude, that's the biggest mistake I've made in my career. I was going to reflect on it after we hung up and told Kyle, but yes, I kind of got cute. I got real cute, and I drew up some play out, a screen pass out in the flat, and that sucker got picked off and ran back for a touchdown. And that was not the play to call in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, there's a lot of hate mail out there. It's not just me. It's like the world is mad at you right now, dude.
Well, I could go easy. I mean, everybody knows to pick you. So as an analyst, what am I telling people when I pick you? That's just going chalk. So I tried to find a logical pick, and it just so turned out Austin Felix decided to have his worst tournament of his life, and you're top 5 and he's bottom 5. And I'm like, well, this really didn't work out for me this week.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there that hate you right now, Ronnie.
Well, I did pick you for Drain the Lake, so I got the double points for you winning there, and that to me is what matters. That's the game mode that I'm the best at, is Drain the Lake. So we used you when it counts, because I can't use you anymore in Drain the Lake only once, and so I got it good. But yeah, I'd like to maybe get a text from you of some names that hate me, so I can steer away from them or explain myself in a DM rather than in person. But you just gotta let me know.
I mean, in Texas, you got Brian News about right here, and Ronnie Moore's about right here.
That's terrible, because I never meant it disrespectfully. It was more so like, I've never seen a favorite more than that, and I don't feel comfortable.
No, we're just kidding. But back to our question, man, I think we literally just missed it by a half of a moon phase. We can't get any information, but just watching the public guides and people like that, man, those fish bit really, really good the week before we were there. And you're not going to see a lot of fish catches the end of this week. We started our tournament. Practice was still pretty good. Now they had a 3-day big bass, like 1,000 boat deal, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. All those guys practiced before. So those fish got really beat up. And then the first day was like a 3-fish day. And it went down every day, 2, 3, and like the final day was like a 1-fish day, just to fish with the moon phase in general. And that stuff is real, like really real. I pay attention to it a lot. My wife pays attention to it more than I do, and it's like clockwork how much it sets up. So we just missed it by a half of a moon phase. Like, you'll see nothing for the next couple of days, and then those guys will just start murdering them again out there, and all the big fish are going to bite, because those schools were there. The first couple of days of practice, I've talked to Mullins and Paul and a bunch of people, and we all had 25, 30 big schools of bass located. I'm talking about pull up, you're going to catch 25 to 38 in 7 or 8 casts and get right. And when I say all those schools disappeared, I mean all those schools disappeared almost, and the ones that stayed just got beat up because there was 2 or 3 boats camping on them all day. One of my best spots, Mueller was on all day, and Mullins and Josh Douglas sat on another. Swindle and De Palma sat on one of my best brim beds, and just stuff like that.
Swindle, De Palma just a little bit because of Swindle, but yeah, we'll just go ahead and say that.
So that's what happened. We still broke 100 pounds, however many guys caught them, but man, we were a week before, a week after to we'll hit it right one time, and we're gonna see, like, there's gonna be 20 100-pound bags and a couple in the close to 130 range eventually when we hit it right, for sure.
Lee, I wanted to ask you about that, because obviously Zona mentioned it, you mentioned it, that Lake Fork is an afternoon bite lake. And I said, well, the afternoon is 2 different things. Afternoon is before weigh-in and afternoon is after weigh-in. So some of these boys found fish that were biting that they weren't ever even going to be able to make a cast when they started biting, because you're already weighed in, especially day 1 and day 2. You have a little bit longer if you're a later flight, but day 3 and day 4, you definitely don't get to weigh in, 4 p.m. or later. And so, but what I noticed in Bass Track, and I said this to Steve Bowman, I said, we need to have an intern that is a fisheries biologist or wildlife management person. And they'll be like, well, I want to go out and shock fish and survey fish. No, you'll learn more about fish watching Bass Track than you will doing whatever they do, because there are, I don't know, let's just say there were thousands of fish caught from 7 to noon Central Time, 7 to noon from takeoff to lunch. Thousands of fish caught and a bunch of 4 to 6 pounders. But from noon to 1 and to 1 to 2, that 2 hours, noon to 2, we saw 90% of the 7s and 8s caught. We didn't have any 9s caught, but 90%. I have to get the exact numbers, but I believe it's like 90% of the 7 and 8 pounders for the week were caught from 12 to 2. And I saw some eerie things where Pipkins and Revette both caught 8 pounders on day 3, and they both caught them within 3 minutes of each other on the lake. Not on the same spot, different part of the lake, 3 minutes of each other. And then you and Brandon on day 3, 12:05. We finished the Fox Sports 1 show at 12 o'clock. At 12:05, he caught a 613, and 12:06, you caught an 8.3 back to back. Like literally, we switched cameras, and you were hooked up with an 8+ pounder. So, can you explain that a little bit to the fans? Why, even though the morning bite was so great, there was a key window that it could be even greater for guys in the afternoon.
Yeah, and it's just always been like that, in this area of Texas, not just here, but Toledo Bend, Sam Rayburn, Conroe, a lot of them are the same. And it's just the time of year, early in the summer, the fish are still kind of eating shad in the morning, eating brim on brim beds, using that mid-depth stuff. And then I think they just kind of trickle down those road beds or points or ridges or whatever it is. And it takes them, till the afternoon when that sun gets high and the water temp gets the warmest until they set up on those deeper spots. That's why you see me I caught them really good early in the morning on days 1 and day 2, but I was fishing shallow, that call it 7 to 11 foot of water or so. And you see guys like Swindle catching them on those deeper brim beds and stuff like that. And then you saw all the guys catching them offshore. It's the same way in 19 when Pipkins and
Paquette and Card and all that.
They weren't catching those fish till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And to be honest, it's really not good until about 5:30 in the afternoon, And
about dinner time for the humans out there.
Yeah, I went the third day of practice. I actually went and ran a bunch of the good stuff late in the afternoon. And I mean, there was like 50 schools out. I could one cast every school, but they're not there during our tournament hours. And it's just a deal, and go wintertime. And it's kind of opposite of what you would think, in the wintertime, like at Rayburn, we catch our fish first hour, like the sun's not even up and we're catching them in 25 foot of water. It's weird. And I don't know why. I'm not a fisheries biologist or anything. I just know that's how it works. And it's, you got to figure it out when they're not biting. That's the deal.
So Lee, one of the most interesting things to me, that you talked about the final day was fishing spots you'd never fished before. Somebody that has fished that lake as much as you have, that's almost a hard thing to believe, but you kind of mentioned how in practice, obviously, and Shea Baker said the same thing. He got to ride along with you on day 1 or 2 of the practice. Obviously you weren't going to spend a ton of time on your really good stuff because you didn't want to give it away, that kind of thing. And you were able to find those spots you'd never even fished before. Talk about that, how you were able to find those spots and how you even stumbled upon them to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, where I caught my fish days 1 and days 2, and a few other spots, I caught fish randomly throughout the tournament. I'd fished a lot of that stuff, not a lot that early in the day, that shallow, where I was catching like 7 to 11. That was kind of new to me, cranking like I was. But the main spot that we're going to talk about is that spot I caught every fish off of the final day. And the third day I caught every fish but that 8 pounder off of it. And I think I weighed in 1 fish off of it a day before that, or not, if not more. So I'd never even graphed that spot. It's a do nothing spot. The first day of practice was on Sunday. There was 1,000 boats out there, and then our guys out there because of that other tournament. So first of all, I couldn't look at anything. There was going to be boats on anything that I liked. guides, tournament guys, or eye guys. So I just went and idled a bunch of just do nothing stuff that I'd never even looked at, just stupid stretches. And I found that spot. I idled over it the first day of practice and never fished it. I just said, man, that looks like a bunch of good ones right there, like almost too good to be true. They were on a tree. I think maybe they're catfish. Maybe somebody had baited a hole out for catfish right there on that tree and they were all hanging around it. And I came back the second day of practice and I had Shay with me doing the bass article, and I threw twice. They weren't on that tree. They were about 15 yards away in the open on the little hard spot. And I threw twice. I caught like a 2 3/4 and like a 3 3/4, and I never threw again. I said, man, good spot to come get me a keeper if I need to, man. Maybe they'll grow. Maybe it's just 15, 16 pounds. If I get in a weird rotation, I can come over here and get right. And it grew. I plucked just 1 or 2 off of it the first day. And the second day, I really got them going. I broke a couple off in that tree, and then I got them going on that 300 DD, and I caught like 5 or 6 in a row cranking. And I caught like a 712 or something, a big one, like almost 8-pounder. I said, okay, I might be able to ride this thing if I need to, because at the same time, I was going every single day. I'd spend 3 or 4 or 5 hours graphing, looking for the schools that I thought I would win off of, and none of them were there, or somebody was on them, and just it beat them to death. So it just worked out just like that. And that third day, I caught all of them, but that 8-pounder there, I caught that 8 on another spot that I fished before in the past, had history. There just weren't many there. And then the third day, I did the same thing. Got nothing in the morning, tried all kinds of new spots, ran way more than I should have, but I had confidence to go back to that spot and got back right, left again, went and looked again like I had every day in the afternoon, and just picked the right time. I said, I got to go back and catch everything I can off that spot right now. And went back and caught what I caught, and made a bait change on my last cast and caught an 8-3 on my very last cast of the day that in my mind sewed it up for me. And obviously it gave me a little bit better cushion than I thought I had, but it was clutch in my mind.
Which I will release that. I'm so glad for your peak performance video. I'm so glad for just that live was already done and no one's seen that 8-pounder. I got a glimpse of it in the truck and I got to see it a little bit. I can't wait to post that for people to see. But Lee, last thing before we let you go, I know you got to get to other shows and podcasts. It's Tuesday is Lee Livesay Day, as well as all 4 days at Fork. But I feel personally that day 2 was your most important day. And I'll explain why. For one, you had 2 fish that you're not supposed to land, and you landed them. They weren't your biggest of the day, but they were ones that I kind of sat there and was like, is it too early to say in an event that it's meant to be? Like, is it too early? Like, normally that's like a day 4 thing. You land one you're supposed to lose and you're like, he's going to win this. But it was day 2. And I was like, is it too early to say that? And then you also caught a good one rotating through baits, which Kyle Jessie did a great Tackle Tip Tuesday video with you about that went up earlier today. You rotated through baits and you caught one on a hair jig. And in the middle of the catch, you said, I can't believe Mueller just left here if he knew what was here, because you saw him blow up on your 360. You saw him lighten up on your 360 and you knew why they were there. Do you feel that day 2 was one of your most important days, in the big scheme of things, based on those couple fish, the one that you caught that Mueller left, and then the 2 that never are supposed to get out of the timber and they just swam up to say, hey?
Yeah, obviously those 2 fish catches in the trees were just shouldn't have happened, one of those crazy deals. But
great promo for Sunline 12-pound test, by the way, too.
Thank you, Sunline, for sure. Stuff like that just happens. Like Polinick always says, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. But another pivotal deal that day, I've learned a lot that day. I don't know if Mueller left those fish, because I don't think I ever weighed another fish there after that fish, but I think he might have just been trying to act like he wasn't fishing it, and he went the other way. I don't know. That doesn't matter.
And he left you a 6-pounder, yeah.
No, I don't even care about the Mueller deal. That wasn't that big. Obviously, it was to catch it, but
yeah.
Finding that same day, I found out what was really on the spot that I ended up winning off of, because I started cranking it and I smashed them, and I caught a big one, like a 712. So I was like, oh, there's more here than I thought, and bigger ones than I thought. And I got to leave it like I did every day. But then I went looking and I found a group of white bass on a ridge that I did not catch a bass out of that day, but I saw 3 or 4 like big, so big I said to Jake, those might be catfish, but I know everything I know they're not catfish. I knew they were big, smart, largemouth. Well, I really didn't need them that day, so I didn't press it. That's where I come back the third day after I've got my bag off that other spot, and I catch that 8-6 or 4, 3, 2, whatever it was.
You're one fish off that spot, but it was your biggest of the week.
I was on live on that one either. I don't think either of my 8-pounders were live, and maybe it was. I don't know. That was huge. Day 2, finding that school that I caught the fish off of the next day. So there was a lot of cool things that happened on day 2 that helped in different phases throughout the tournament.
Kyle, do you have anything for Lee before we let him go?
The last thing I want to ask him is about his flotilla. So naturally, we usually only talk about big flotillas during the Classic. Not to say that there's not spectators for normal tournaments, but I just remember being out there on the last day thinking to myself, I even said it to my boat driver, I said, maybe this bad weather will deter some of those folks from being out there on the water. And I was covering Mark Frazier, and I see Lee go by, and then I see about 30 other boats just zooming by. So I just want to ask you about that, how that affected you. I know you're obviously a huge people person, so I know you enjoy having them there for the energy and things of that nature, but how is it like navigating through that? Because sometimes I would see you hit a spot, and by the time half the flotilla had made it, you were already leaving. So how did that affect, your efficiency, I guess, throughout the day?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't affect me at all. There might be some guys pissed off at me about how much gas I made them burn or breaking a trolling motor or something. I know it was pretty rough out there, but man, I appreciate everybody following me around. It's pretty cool, and I'm not even going to get into that, but I talked to Josh Douglas one day, and he said the same thing. Oh my God, I saw all those boats following you, and his exact words were, that's what I dream about, is one day having somewhere, some place in town, a flotilla following me like that and cheering me on, and I'm blessed to have it happen here and at the Classic and other places too. So it's something that I enjoy a lot, and they don't bother me at all.
We've all been there, all 3 of us here. We haven't had the flotilla on us, but we've been a photographer on an angler who had a flotilla, and as the day went on, people left and went elsewhere, and the angler looks back and it's just us out there, and he's like, man, we're really losing this event today, aren't we? Because everyone's gone. And I'm like, I'm here with you, buddy. I'm telling the story whether you win or lose, or and you become ingrained and entrenched with the story of those anglers because you're grinding it out with them as well. But it is very, very cool. We were feeding off the energy on live every time we hear that horn going off, and it's just you as soon as you set the hook, no one's on their phone and then they're like, oh, he's got one. It was as soon as you set the hook, yeah, Lee, get him, Lee, and you're like, shut up, like they're too loud, and so it's very, very cool aspect of that. And kudos to them. It's 5.5 feet low at Lake Fork. It is hard to probably find a spot to get out of the way without killing yourself on some trees as well.
Yeah, the wind blew and it was cold last day. Little kids, women, grown men, people from all over the place showed up. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. Well, hey, Kyle, we'll let him go. Lee, you're a busy man, rightfully so. One of the hottest anglers in the sport of bass fishing, 4 wins at the top level of B.A.S.S. in the last 580 days. Lee Livesay, appreciate you, man. And hey, enjoy the next few days before you got to rig up and get to Pickwick for another offshore beatdown.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me on. I'll see y'all soon.
Yes, sir. See you, Lee.
See you, Lee.
Kyle, the man, Lee Livesay, just to be able, I think that like you said with Josh Douglas, having a flotilla is something you dream of. Man, winning on your home lake with your mother and your brother and your cousin and your uncle, all those people showing up, and your buddy. I know I went to the minnow bucket one day with Lee. I went to Lake Fork in the middle of the summer, shot some tackle tip videos with him, and it was really early in his career, first or second year. I think it was after he didn't do great at the 2019 event. I think I did it in 2020. And obviously Fork was in the fall. And we stopped at the minnow bucket to eat some lunch. And I mean, he barely could eat a potato chip because so many people were like, stop. Hey, what's up, Lee? Shaking your hand. Hey, what's up, Lee? Shaking your hand. And to win at home, God, that would be so cool. So cool.
It's really incredible. And there's nothing I can say to put it into perspective for people. But that final day, I mean, really, the flotilla on the water is huge as it is. I mean, that was incredible. And it's really hard to explain for not the Classic. And then 2, though, like you mentioned earlier, the weigh-in was electric. I mean, it was electric. Everybody knew before the weigh-in even started, ultimately, like, let's be honest, who was going to win. But I mean, I can remember sitting there and just thinking to myself, this is amazing. And it's no different really, excuse me, than it was last year, but it was just so cool to be a part of. You know, the amount of people, like Lee mentioned, that basically feel like they won that tournament too. You rarely get that really anywhere with anybody, but you know, Lee Livesay has such a fan club in that area and really, you know, has grown pretty much across the country. But and it's not like that just at Lake Fork. I had the chance to cover him on the final day of the Classic this last year, and he had, you know, a decent flotilla following him, and it was incredible to me. And Ronnie can attest to this. When you're covering an angler, basically what you want to do is make sure he basically doesn't even know you're there, to an extent. Like, you don't want to be a distraction. Well, about 30 minutes,
other than when you yell, hold him up, right before he throws him back or something, puts him in the line, hold him up.
Exactly. There's a time and place to talk, but more often than not, you just try to keep to yourself and, you know, let them focus. That last day of the Classic, about 30 minutes into the day, a random guy pulls up in a boat and comes basically in between where I'm at and Lee's at. And I'm thinking, who is this guy? This is not good. Like, I mean, I was already mad, you know, to start with. Lee just turns around and starts talking to him as if they're not fishing the final day of the Bassmaster Classic. Just the most friendly, like he knew who he was. Ultimately, I found out, but it's just incredible the fact that he's such a good dude to everybody. I mean, it has grown his career in a huge way. Obviously, catching him does a lot, but you know, the fact that he has gained such a fan following in such a short amount of time is really impressive, and it's cool to be a part of. You know, that we've seen it from, you know, like you said, where nobody even really knew who he was to where it is now. It's really pretty incredible.
Well, combined that he's very, very tall, he's pretty quiet, he's from Texas, or he lives in Texas, and his nickname was the Marshal. You would think that he's pretty intimidating and kind of a mean guy, but then the way he starts out every single video that he shoots with Bassmaster, he's always like, hey, everyone, you know, and it's like, he's so nice. Like, that's all he's got to say. Hey, everyone, Lee Livesay here. I'm like, that dude is nice as can be. And so it is very cool. I got to see Lee last fall. I went down and spoke at a church in Longview. Actually, someone from our church in Little Rock actually went down there and now works at a church in Longview. And I stopped by Lee's house and shot some videos with him. And like he said, there's just so much connection that happens in the sport. I've probably talked to him. It's not as much as other people by any means, but I've probably talked to him 3 to 5 times a week, because we both have young daughters, you know, that are 2 weeks apart from each other. And mine just turned 2 months old, you know, and so it's pretty cool. Also, we didn't get to talk to him about it, but Lane Livesay has never been to a weigh-in that her dad wasn't leading. I mean, that is, talk about spoiled early. I mean, Didn't show up for day 1 at Ross Barnett, day 2 and day 3, daddy's leading and wins. Doesn't show up day 1 at Lake Fork, day 2 through 4. Dad barely is even below first on Bass Track all day. Very, very cool aspect of that. But it is like a fishing community, and Lee is one that embraces it. And that's why I always ask that question, or remember, people are like, yeah, you don't know who the elite pros are. That's what people have said in the past, or this guy's not good enough to make it, or you just don't know who is good enough to perform and show up. To think that Lee Livesay got 16th in points the year we accepted him in, there was about 8 Elite Series pros ahead of him. So he wasn't 16th added in. He was basically 8th or 9th out of the 10 we added in. He was right there towards the bottom, though, one of the last guys invited. And he's got a white t-shirt on, and he's some guy from Texas. And you're like, how is this guy going to do on the elites? And you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just the first event, he blows up, you know, and he's a big name now. And you always wonder about that when anyone ever tries to slight someone, I'm just going to end up saying they could be the next Patrick Walters or Lee Livesay, because Walters was right there ahead of him, like 5th or 6th. And we were only taking 3 or 4, and it was 5th or 6th, and Livesay was 8th or 9th. And you're like, it could be the next Drew Cook or Patrick Walters, which if we kept our normal format of adding pros, they both wouldn't have made it. None of those 3 guys would have made it. And they're 3 elite champions and biggest names of this, rising names of the sport. And so I think that you probably have a perspective on that too, just seeing the close pitfalls of some people not qualifying, but like, you just don't know the points leader in that division may have a worse career than the guy who was the last one in. It just all in how you handle the opportunities you're given.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, the best way you can put it with Lee and really all those guys that you just mentioned, I mean, they're gamers. I mean, they show up and it's not a overmatched thing. I can confidently say, I know you and I have talked about this before, but if the roster in 2018 would have never changed, let's say those guys got their opportunity, I truly believe they'd still be doing the same thing right now just because they have it. And, that's one of those things. I mean, you see, what you just said is spot on. There's guys that you would say, like, that's a can't miss. He's going to kill it. And it doesn't happen. I mean, it goes both ways, but what Lee and all those guys that you just mentioned have been able to do in really a pretty short amount of time is really, really pretty incredible.
Yeah. And I think that it would have been a shame if we weren't introduced to these guys. So I'm super glad. I never have any regrets or like what ifs, but like that is the one aspect that I look at and I'm like, you know what? A lot of bad things in life seem bad the day they happen and they end up being just fine. Or, you know what? I see why this was supposed to happen, a year or two later. And man, we've had some people introduced in the sport that are just big time gamers, like you said. And it would have probably been Lee's pitfall, fishing 3 events. You just never know how long it'll take you to do it fishing 3. But I know it's hard to beat Lee Livesay, Patrick Walters, and Drew Cook fishing all 9. I guarantee you. You know what I'm saying? So, but yeah, that's those were some of my thoughts on Lee and how we've got to where we're at with him. But it does seem like when he's on camera, man, it is electric. It is exciting. And I want to be on live broadcasting it because you just don't. He's a great speaker as well. When it comes to breaking down what he's doing. And he did a great job. I will say he did the best. If anyone wants to know how to pub a bait, a company, or product, do what Lee Livesay did, because anytime something was pertinent to the reason he caught that fish, thank you, Sunline, for not breaking. Check out the 6 Sense 300 DD. Most of the time it's refreshing because it was a sponsor bait and he doesn't have to necessarily fib about it, or he doesn't have to be quiet about it. But a lot of times we see guys catch him and he turn around and, hey, look at this fish. And you're like, hey, what's in your hand?
Bait to the water.
Yeah, exactly. Some guys are so eager to unhook it and throw it back. I'm waiting for him to throw the fish out with it and be like, oh, look, where's the bait? So it is cool to see that. But he did do some great seminars. I can't wait to go through the footage the rest of this week because there was a lot of goodness taught in there from his boat, from Brandon Polnick's boat, from a lot of guys' boats this week.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the funny thing about it is, I wanted to mention this because you brought this up a second ago, is I talked to my brother after weigh-in, and he was asking me, it's like, do you know Lee Livesay well? Like, is he one that you've gotten to know pretty well? I was like, I don't think anybody hasn't, I feel like everybody has gotten the opportunity to know Lee Livesay because that's just who he is. Like, he's like that, what we were just talking about, to every single person he meets. So, I mean, like you said, as far as like a teacher and everything goes as well, as good as it gets there, because he's one of those guys that is understanding that you're always learning. I heard him and Polnick talking after the tournament, right before I shot that, or excuse me, right after the tournament. I don't know if I said before.
After the tournament, before your tackle tip. Yeah.
Right. Before I shot the tackle tip. And that's what they were both talking about is, Polnick obviously fell short, but the first thing he said is like, I learned a lot this tournament from the things I saw and the things that, transpired. And, they got to talking about that. And it was really cool to see that, these guys are stewards of the game, and, not only are they learning, but they're great teachers. Like you mentioned, they're able to get on camera and explain and talk about how they're executing this game plan or what they're doing, how they're doing it. And I think from a fan's perspective, somebody like you and I that grew up watching Bassmaster, I mean, that's what you want to see. That's what you want. That's what you basically crave all the time. So, obviously just a super good dude for our sport, and, just like a ton of the Elite Series pros.
Yeah, I was going to comment. I got a couple things to react to that, but I was going to comment on Brandon's Instagram post when he posed with Lee and the trophy. I was gonna be like, hey, glad you hung around for this weigh-in, because Brandon hangs around for all weigh-ins, but he was in contention to win the event. I was like, glad you hung around on the final day weigh-in. But also, I don't know why he did this, but Brandon just tortured himself and went out on Lake Fork yesterday and caught 33 pounds off of his spots that only produced 17 on the final day. I would have just hate myself and be like, well, why didn't you show up yesterday, bud? That would have been great. But yeah, Brandon went out and is still learning. And that's so very cool. We talk about Rick Clunn. The day that Rick Clunn stops learning while he's out on the water is the day that he's not fishing anymore. Like, he's done. And I think that Brandon and Lee have those same types of aspects if they're not learning. And I think it's very interesting that Livesay fishes spots and fished spots that he never really fished before. It's hard for me to believe because the way, okay, to put perspective on it, when he says, I fished a couple spots and caught fish places I've never fished before, never is a weird word because it boxes you into the exact word it is. That means he's never once cast it or graphed or looked or been there. And it's very hard to do that at Lake Fork. But just, it's probably never been a spot that's had quality enough that was worth fishing. You know what I'm saying? He probably knows that it's a point that comes off there and there's some timber, but never really used it in a game plan, never had to use it anywhere. And this week, because it may not have the right ingredients for everything, it might have been overlooked by a lot of people. And that might have just been a free spot that wasn't occupied all week. You know what I'm saying? You have those different stretches when you drive by and you're like, I want to fish that and no one's there, but I hope they're not there when I come back. You know, you got to do that at Lake Fork. If there's a spot you want to fish and no one's there, you got to pull in right then, because you give it an hour and there's 10 people who have fished it. So
right. I
think that's a little more perspective on it. But yeah, you shot the tackle tip with him and I edited it. 6 cents 300 DD, which is like a 12 or 13 foot crankbait that goes to about 16 or 17. You know, it is truly a mid-depth crankbait. He also threw a 6 cents hybrid jig with a net bait packer crawl or pack a slim on the back of it, depending. Right. And then he threw that hair jig as well. And it was so crucial for his bite. Even though he caught majority of his 113 pounds on the crankbait and the jig, he caught 2 key fish. And I went and found them this morning in the system. He caught a 515 and I think he caught a, I want to say it was like a 5.3, maybe it was a 6.2, but it was 2 fish in that 515 to 6 pound range on that hair jig, which weren't his biggest of the week, weren't his smallest. And who knows, he could have probably caught other 5-pounders to replace it. But those 2 fish bit when they needed to. And it gave him more baits to try out on spots, which is always key when you're rotating offshore stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And the fact that all of those baits, you know, something that he and I talked about before we even shot the video, is you're talking about different depth ranges, right? So obviously the jig, he was fishing more or less just dragging on the bottom. At least, once again, you can attest to this because you watched it live. I didn't get to cover him on the water. But, you know, your suspended fish with a hair jig, your fish that are glued to the bottom or, you know, less active with the jig, and then, you know, basically get them fired up with that crankbait. And, you know, that's what it takes. I mean, it rarely do you see an offshore tournament where you're talking about groups of fish, schools of fish, all, you know, dominated on one bait. Obviously, you know, cranking tournaments, you're going to see a lot of fish caught on crankbaits, but you kind of have to have those, I wouldn't necessarily say follow-up baits, but baits to rotate through, because those fish aren't always in the same mood. They're not always setting up on the bottom or, you know, off the bottom the same way. But it's really impressive to see him have that rotation and understand when what bait was going to work for those fish, rather than just, you know, fishing a spot with a crankbait and just bouncing. I mean, having a rotation, you know, is super important. And, you know, he definitely executed that flawlessly.
And I will say, if it was calm for the 4 days of the tournament, we always say what conditions help what guys. If it was calm, he would have probably wrecked them even more. But I think a lot of other people would have wrecked them more as well. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It wouldn't have been a 10-pound win. You know, it wouldn't have been, which is crazy. We've had 4 elites at Fork. I think it was 12-1 was the deficit between Cobb and Paquette. It was like 29 pounds for Walters and Combs. And then last year it was 10 pounds from Livesay to Walters. This year it was just 2 pounds until the last hour, and Livesay made it basically 11.5 pounds for a victory. So we've never had a close 1-2 matchup. So if it was calm, I feel like it would have been much closer. And because it was so windy, I think that exclusively helped Livesay, because those guys who did catch a big weight or mid-20s could not go around and easily find another spot to maybe upgrade or find more. You can't graph and idle as well in 4-foot waves out there, idling into the waves on tournament day. I'll idle one spot and get one over the front of the bow and I'm done. You know, I'm going to go fish the bank somewhere or something. So I think that big wind was key for him positioning the way he did. We saw a lot of Ultrex spot lock this way, casting off the back of the boat this way, or at least retrieving it that way, having to use your angles, and also having to rely on either memory, history, or fishing a little free. Other guys can't do that in those rough conditions. They may have a spot, they blow it out on day 1 and day 2, but it just 4 days of wind, it's going to be a little tougher. And it started to get less windy. We saw day 3, a big uptick for some other guys that kind of caught them big time. And then day 4, I didn't think that cool temperature deal was going to affect the offshore bite like it did for some of those guys. But we saw a lot less crankbait fish. We saw a lot more worm fish from Frazier, right, from LeHue, and from Strassner. I don't know what the deal is, but one thing I'll also say, and you can attest to this covering Frazier and covering Strassner on that final day, I saw a lot of long, lean giants, 6.5 to 8 pound fish, long and lean, days 1 through 3. On that final day, every single big fish that I saw had a gut. It was shorter. That's why we didn't have an over. The only day of the tournament we didn't have an over. And I noticed it on Bass Live, and I said it, and Mark Zona agreed with me. Those fish on the final day in the cool temperatures, the cool air temperatures, and the overcast skies looked totally different. It was like it was a totally different wave of fish that came up to bite. All those post-spawn long fish went somewhere else, and we had a bunch of either fish that had spawned 2 months ago and were finally full up in the post-spawn, or I guess pre-spawn fish. We had some anglers say that's a pre-spawner. Hard to say that with I guess a clear conscience and 85-degree water temperature to see a pre-spawner in Texas. But I don't know if you noticed that, but even the 2-pounders people caught were shorter, had to measure them to make sure they kept, and they had a gut on them. And a lot of those the 7-pounder LeHue caught early in the morning, and then the 8.5 he caught, and then the 8.12, obviously, that Frazier caught, the 8.3 that Livesay caught. Y'all don't know at home, but I saw it. Just every fish was just so gutted compared to long and lean post-spawner. It looked like a different lake.
Sure. Now, that's actually a good point. So, I'm like you. I know you're hesitant to say those are pre-spawn fish because naturally you wouldn't think you wouldn't think that's the case, and it very well may not be. But one thing I was talking to Luke Palmer about before the tournament started is, you can attest to this. There's a lot of lakes like Logan Martin here in Alabama. There's a handful more of them that the water is low. They bring it down, and that's just part of it's a design thing, plan thing, just like at Fork. Obviously, a lot of lakes they do it every year. And those fish won't spawn until the water comes up. So, Palmer was giving me an idea that there probably was some pre-spawn fish still there based on the fact that, those fish were looking to spawn where there was no water. I mean, it was just straight up dry land. So, whether or not they were pre-spawners or not, there's probably some fish that, like you said, had spawned so long ago that, they've kind of built back up and fed up. The chance of pre-spawners is not completely unrealistic because some of those fish really might just be waiting until the water comes up, and they might just have to just deal with it and spawn where they spawn. But it's certainly a possibility. And I was actually kind of a little thrown off when Luke mentioned that to me, like I said, the day before the tournament started, because I was like, surely not. But when you think about the low water aspect of it, it's definitely possible. And you can't rule it out, because I'm sure I actually was talking to Frazier on the water, and he said that he had heard some guys that were catching fish that they suggested were spawning, not necessarily visibly.
There's some
spawning,
spawners. Some people caught some spawners
spawning on the trees and things of that nature. So if there's fish spawning, it's not to say there's not fish still not spawned yet.
That's true, and it's just so hard for me to think that 90% of the fish caught on the final day were pre-spawn all of a sudden.
Right,
and maybe sorry, my camera's a little blurry. Maybe it was some of those fish that were really keyed in on the shad spawn had maybe ate their fill, and they were full up. They were bulging out the sides a little bit, maybe some gizzard shad mixed in and stuff. So that might be a possibility as well, but very interesting. And my biggest downfall of the week was not picking Lee Livesay. Man, I would have had such a good fantasy team if I picked him. I had Chris Johnson on the final day. Lester and Gussie both moved up. And the only one who missed the cut, if I would have picked Livesay, would have been Combs. And I wouldn't have had one in the 89th. I would have had one in first. What should have cut. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, well, I told you all along I thought that was too big of a risk, and you and I texted back and forth about it all week. But you
did switch your pick though. You said you might switch it to Combs, and you did, which it actually gained you more points doing that. But yeah, you second guessed and you fell in with it. At least I was driving into the ditch and I just floored that sucker. You know what? Whatever. I'm going to just go with my gut and I'm going to floor it. I'm going to put it in 4 high and we're just going to try to go off road. And it didn't work out. I hit a tree.
The difference is, though, I went with a more chalk pick. You went away from the chalk pick, and not that, like you said, Combs had a great event, but no, I think that Bucket E was definitely really tough. I know we're not talking about fantasy fishing, but that was just a tough bucket in general.
I think Austin Felix caught his PB last week in Texas before fishing fork, and I think he caught that fish weighed more than his whole fork total. Honestly, I think. No, but I love Felix. I did text him after day one when he had like 4 fish and was like, "Hey, I picked you over Lee Livesay." And he's like, "I saw," and that was it. He didn't text back. I was like, "Well, I love you. No regrets." No regrets. Anyways, Kyle, what a great episode getting to talk to Lee about a little bit different. There's a lot of different podcasts out there that'll talk to Lee about the nuts and bolts of Bass Live. If you saw it, you saw the flair for dramatics. We're going to have a lot of videos out this week on Bassmaster and early next week before Pickwick about Lee Livesay. And we're going to flood the market with him because he is the hottest angler in the sport. And we're glad he got to join us for at least 15 to 20 minutes on his carousel of calls. I feel like if you win the Classic, you have a lot of media requests. And I feel like if you win on your home lake over 100 pounds, you have just as many as the Classic. That's obviously a little hyperbole. There's always more with the Classic, but I feel like he's going through the ringer of it today. And, but yeah, Lee Livesay, Bassmaster Elite Series champion, 2 times at Fork, 1 time at Chickamauga, and he won an Open last month on Ross Barnett. What a great champion. And, I'm glad to see him pull it off. I would love to win at home, but hey, if any of those top 3, it would have been storylines. If Polinick won, I mentioned it on live. If Polinick won the year he won AOY, he's the last Angler of the Year champion to also win an event in his year he won it. Like 2018, Lucas didn't win an event. 2019, Canterbury didn't. Winland didn't. Fighter didn't. And right now, Polinick's leading AOY. If he would have won it, that could be a fast track because he won at Rayburn in 17. So who knows about that? He's still got the Angler of the Year lead. I'm going to send him the graphic that has the first, second, third, and the point differentials, but I'm going to blur out the numbers for him so that he just knows who's first, second, third, but he doesn't know the points because he didn't want to know that. So great second place finisher. And then Gerald Swindle, kudos to him, his 2nd Century Club. Him and Livesay both did it. Now they're the 10th and 11th anglers all time to have more than 1 Century Club belt, which is cool. And then Shane LeHue knocking it out. What a great final day. He needed 27-1 to break 100. He had 27-10. What a day for him as well.
Stepping up to the plate on the final day. I think that was, obviously Lee Livesay winning the tournament was the biggest storyline, and as it should be. But LeHue's final day, catching basically exactly what he needed to hit the 100-pound mark from down below. Obviously he needed just about as much as anybody. Besides what would have been Lowen and
I think Mark Frazier as well. Mark Frazier was right there. He needed like another pound and he almost got it, but he didn't. There was a couple guys like that, but I will say before we go, I'm going to drop a Century Club stat on you. I got everything updated on the spreadsheet. Obviously, Brandon Cobb had 114 even at Fork in 2019, but Lee Livesay's 113 pounds, 11 ounces is the 14th highest weight in Bassmaster history overall, 14th highest, and it is the 1, 2, 3, 5th highest winning weight of all time. Obviously, all those other ones being 14th on the list, but the 5th highest, all those other ones are Fork and Clear Lake. But yeah, Paul Elias, he won Falcon with 132.8. That is the record. Steve Kennedy won Clear Lake with 122.14. That's the second highest winning weight. We have Preston Clark 115.15 at Santee Cooper, Cobb with 114, and then Livesay with 113.11. Also, Lake Fork, we had 5. Lake Fork is now with 9, the second most century clubs on a lake, just second to Falcon, obviously. And it's been done over 50 times now by 36 anglers. That's awesome that 36 people in the world have caught over 100 pounds in a bass event. And for LeHue and for Polinick to add their names to it is pretty cool.
You have to think, I was just thinking this whenever you were saying those statistics, and we didn't ask Lee this, but you'd have to think one of his goals in life at this point is to beat that all-time record, because he wants to. I feel like I mentioned to him, very outspoken before the tournament started, that it was definitely a real possibility that record was going to fall. So now I feel like, if nothing else, just out of spite, he wants to do it. And that's definitely a cool thing to hold. That's a cool record to hold.
I think that, every single lake or community pays to have bass into town. They're the host community. They want bass to show up. And so there's always a negotiation of fees. I guarantee you Lee Livesay will pay $100,000 for them to come back to Fork. And if he gets to pick the week that we do it at, so the week that he's going to pick the week that they can maybe break the all-time record. And I think if we break the all-time record at Fork, I'll just go ahead and say this. I don't know if we ever will, but if we do, I guarantee you the top 2 anglers break it. I guarantee you 2 anglers will go above Paul Elias's number, which would be crazy to see that. You break the all-time bass record and not even win the event that you're in. That would be terrible. Oh my gosh. But
that'd be pretty bad. That'd be really bad.
Well, Kyle, thank you for always joining me on the podcast. I love doing these things. We're going to have June, before we know it'll be here. Pickwick is next week. We're going to have the pattern of the month coming up as well. And like I said, if you're listening still, like and subscribe. Appreciate you guys joining us on this. It's a fun little deal we get to do, get some insight, get some perspective from a guy watching Bass Live every minute of action, and the guy on the water seeing all the unseen action, and then the anglers that make it happen. So thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast, and we will see you in the next one. I'm Ronnie Moore, and my co-host Kyle Jessie signing off.